All right, I'm going to be talking about episode 26 of Frieren Beyond Journey's End, and there's a couple of lines within the episode that I want to touch on because I am under the impression whenever I feel something within an anime, there's probably some resonant reason for me feeling that said thing, because in all likelihood, maybe there's some aspect that I can relate to it from my own personal life because I was watching the anime in the first place, and this was ranked number 1 on my anime list .com or .net. So I just wanted to touch on this. Like, if there may be some spoilers, but it's also, I feel like it's not really major spoilers. It's more just like stories and backgrounds. So a little bit of background as well too before we get jumped in. So this girl, she's a third class mage. There's multiple different mages. They're all on this test to be able to acquire the type of information that they want to acquire so they can become first class mages, so that they can get more. Because in the video that I was talking about the other day around making decisions, is we in our life have to make crucial decisions in our life to be able to go do certain things. You can go check out that video after you watch this one or prior. I don't really mind. Either one works best for me. So she's asking this guy, she's like, hey, are you willing to fight that thing? Because the one that she's having to fight is the all-powerful first-class mage, and he's just like, yeah, that's what we're supposed to do. Like, and it's just like, do we have to do this to conquer this dungeon? And he's going into like Frieren, and Frieren, if you aren't aware, she's like the main character. She's this character right here, the main elf that's helping to defeat all these other people, which she's incredibly strong as well too. And she's like, I didn't ask for an explanation. Is this necessary? And that's where a lot of the times we'll start to explain certain things that we don't necessarily need to explain. Whenever somebody asks us a question, like at the gym, I was talking to a buddy of mine the other day, and he was like, yeah, so what are you working out? And all of a sudden the dude's like, well, so I just got a new job. It's like, that's what happens to me all the time too. I love it. I enjoy it. I don't mind hearing the explanations if they're sometimes when they are, if you just need to talk, but there's other times where I'm like, okay, we need to get to the point. So that's when it's just like, yes, it is necessary for us to defeat it. And that's where she's like, then I'll defeat it. I'll defeat this matchup. And all the other mages and people are like, well, what are you talking about? Because he can do clones. Like, he has this other magic, which I don't necessarily know about, which is like, what are you talking about? Denkin is the strongest one here. Like, he already knows how strong he is, but like, she's the third class. He's like a first class. So like, they don't necessarily understand it. And this is something that's going to be great once you understand this concept, because I have found tremendous value in this. And it's just like Werbel, I can't remember who Werbel is. Wirbel. Wirbel in Frieren. So he was this guy earlier in the previous episode on one of the other trains where she was like using his magic against him, which if you remember that scene or if you remember that episode, like she was like she was basically defeated by him. So the four eyes guy is like, well, you can't defeat him. You weren't even able to defeat this guy right here. Like, you basically lost in battle. One of the other characters had to come in and save you. And that's where she's like, okay, well, let's just continue on with this for a brief second. So it's just like, yeah, that's not how this thing works. Like, her talent is completely different. And this is what I want you to understand, because I've tried to explain this to other people as well too, is like, just because you weren't able to defeat this other opponent doesn't mean that you can't defeat this other opponent, which that'll make sense here in a second. It's just like, so it's just like, she even acknowledges it's true that I'm an inexperienced third class mage. Like, she has no, like, she knows that. So I'm far weaker than Dakin or Werbel. So like, she understands that as well too. But I think I can beat Sensen. I think I said her name right. And Forrest is like, well, what do you mean? It's just like, this is my specialty. And like, she's able to cut right through the rock. Like, that's her specialty, is being able to cut through the rock. So Real Seedin, a spell that cuts almost anything. And that's where it's just like, okay, well, if it can cut almost anything, I think it can. If it cuts anything, I think it can. And it can't cut anything, I think it can't. So if she thinks that it can cut hair, regardless of how much magical ability is imbued in that, then like, it can defeat it. So that's why he's like, so what? The spell is easily blocked by defensive magic. It's just like, yeah, defensive magic is for blocking spells, and it's hard for me to imagine cutting it, because a defensive magic spell is something that has to be blocked. But like, cutting hair, I cut my hair last night, is something that is very easy to imagine doing, because like, hair is simple, regardless of how much magic or other like things are within it. Like, you can cut it with ease. So I see then either way it won't work against Sensen. And it's just like, based only on what we can observe, the hair has multiple layers of spells equal to defensive magic. And it's just like I told you, that sort of logic doesn't matter. And this is where I say, like, you have to be willing to throw logic out the window, regardless of what it may be. As long as you believe it to be true, it can happen. And that's why talk about what, like, I'm talking about what I can visualize. If you can visualize yourself doing that said act, then you're golden. And that's why they're kind of freaking out, like, wait, you're going to die. Like, you can't do this. But like, she knows intrinsically that her intuition is going to allow her to cut the hair, because hair is something that is meant to be cut. And it's just like, Well, a person's hair is part of their body, and it's impossible to see all of her at once. So it's just like, okay, well, if hair can be cut, then like she already knows that she's already lost fighting my replica, and it won't even be a real fight because she already knows because they've had this previous conversation. So we're going to go back in time. So it's like 2 years ago during the second class mage exam, this person was fighting to protect the second class. Then like he also had skilled defensive magic. So like this is like his magic skills and everything like that. And like he hadn't been injured at all. He had the immovable cloak, and then all of a sudden this like rain, like everybody was throwing like all these magical attacks at him. Nothing was phasing him, like because they couldn't imagine a way of being able to defeat somebody that had this magical stuff in their mind, because they were intellectually being able to be like, oh well, I can't intellectually beat this person. Whereas like she came in and intuitively, and we're gonna touch on this a little bit more here in a second, but it's like nobody was worried about her, and then all of a sudden she was like, oh well, crud, like. She cut way deeper than she meant to. And there was this rule where like if they killed the person, they'd be out. This is why she ended up having to go back to like the class again. And it's just like, oh, I didn't think that he was going to get killed. But it's just like, this was a no-name girl who just recently became a third class mage. And it's just like, yeah, she fails. I have one question for you. This is the other part that I wanted to talk about. So I have just one question for you. Go ahead. How did you defeat his immovable cloak? She goes into this whole backstory about sewing. And then it's just like, why do you ask? And it's just like, because like sewing, I've actually never tried it myself since I'm so clumsy, yada, yada, yada. But throughout this whole process, she's like, I used to watch my sister sew all the time, which is really fascinating and cool. And it's just like when you cut cloth, you place the scissors against the slide and you slide them through, and it makes this really nice sound. And I like the sound. And there's probably multiple times in your life too where you've had certain sounds that you've enjoyed hearing or listening to, whatever it may be, that have been able to inspire you, or certain smells that bring you back to certain moments. So I don't see where you're going with this. And it's just like, I'm talking about visual imagination. And this is something that I want to touch on. And I touched on briefly a while ago too, around like making the impossible possible. Like if you can imagine it, then it can become true. So it's like clothes can be cut. You expect it to be able to be cut. So that's exactly the vision that she had in her mind, regardless of like everything else that her logical mind was telling her. And I touched on this in the Izidori and Sukuna video, which I know is different from this anime, but it's around the subconscious and the subconscious mind. And if you can imagine it, it can become true. That's why this other all-powerful mage is like, she's out of her mind. That's not how magic works. It's true that anyone can imagine cutting clothes. Even an idiot can do that. But the world of magic isn't so simple. And that's where I'd be like, well, what if it is? Like, what if the world of magic is so simple, and we as our intellectual mind start to over-rationalize things that are within our own head because we want to have an intellectual reason instead of just trusting our intuition of what needs to happen. I do this all the time now. It's just like, you just have to trust your higher self. You have to trust your subconscious that it is leading you down the path that it needs to lead you, because it's here to give you everything that you have ever wanted, and that is magic. So magic can't create anything the caster can't visualize perfectly. So it's like, we don't really need to read that. Hardly any mage can imagine penetrating that cloak, because they just don't have the imaginative capabilities of being able to figure out like, how can I get through this defensive system. Whereas like for her, she wasn't looking at the magic itself, she was looking at the cloak. So any mage can tell at a glance that the cloak blocks all magical items. Truly an idiot can see that, but she's no idiot. Like the first class mage is like, oh, she's an idiot because she's like trying to think with her intellectual, like she's thinking with her intuition instead of with her mind, which any mage can tell like that a cloak will block all magical attacks. But like to her, she's not seeing it that way. So it's like she starts to see it as like, as long as people are intellectual organisms, we cannot escape those fetters, which fetters is, what is that word? Fetters. A chain of restrained personal typical place under the ankles. So it's like we can't, it's basically a bond in a sense. So it's restraints with chains or manacles typically around the ankles. So this is where the mind comes into a problem, because as long as people are intellectual organisms, we cannot escape the chains that are holding us back to that said place. But she trusts her own intuition instead. And this is something that I help out with, is helping you trust your own intuition, because our intuition is our best guide that we can ever have, trusting the gut, but our mind will always come up with these reasons or rhymes as to why not to do this said thing. But trusting the intuition of what you want to have happen is the only way that I've found to be in a better place, because like despite understanding it intellectually that it couldn't be cut, she considered a version of cutting through the cloak according to her intuition. The intuition is key in anything that you do. So it's like our minds, if you want to trust your intuition, you have to remove all mind, remove all thought, and just trust the internal system that is breathing your lungs and beating your heart and flowing the blood through your body. Trust that with everything that you have, because then your mind will not function like a normal person. And if you want to have superpowers, which this is great, just practically a superpower. When I was a kid, I always wanted to have superpowers. Like that was always my goal. I was like, if I can have any sort of superpower, and trusting your intuition is like having a superpower. So that's when she's like, so that's some pretty hair, and it's just like, I bet it's tough to maintain. So like, perhaps she had already known that she lost back then in that conversation. So it's just like, it was a bad matchup because she trusts her intuition more than she right here trusts her mind. Like she trusts her mind, but she trusts her intuition. It's so much better to trust your intuition than it is to trust your mind. So if you're able to trust your intuition, there's going to be lots of great things that come along. And this is where I was talking about in the last video, where like you have to trust your intuition to make the right decision for you at the right time. Because if you aren't trusting your intuition, then like she would have lost this battle. But like she knew what was possible with the power of scissors, regardless of what magic or what other abilities were on. So like if she had seen somebody, first of all, like cut, let's say, a magical barrier, like beforehand, I don't have that scene right now, but if she saw somebody cut a magical barrier, then she would be able to imagine cutting that barrier, and then she would be able to get through that defensive strategy, because that's what she had here. Like if she saw somebody cut this right here, then she herself would be able to cut it. But since she's never seen that be cut, there's no way for her to cut it. But since she has seen somebody like have their hair cut, like that's easy for her to visualize, or seen somebody like cut fabric, like that's easy for her to visualize because like that has been cut. So it's just using the intellect, like the intuition of the mind of knowing that this is something that can be cut, then it can be done. If you can't intellectually visualize it and understand it in an intuitive or a non-intuitive way, then there's no way for it to be done. But if you can understand it intuitively and just believe that it's true, then like regardless of what anybody else says or thinks is true, it won't be true. Because like regardless of like, if you don't think that you can, like, and if you think that magic isn't so simple, what if it is so simple? Like, what if those are just beliefs that you've been told from other people that are quote unquote more powerful than you, when in actuality, you're the most powerful being that has ever existed? If you want to learn more about this, you can book a call with me down below. We can talk about these ideas in more depth. There's a fee associated to this just because that's the way that I know that you'll actually implement the things that I'm talking about. At least that's how I've always implemented things. So if that's something you want to do, you can book a call. Or you can just subscribe to the channel if you made it to the end of the video, because most of the people that watch these videos don't make it to the end. So if you did make it to this point, you might as well sub with the notifications on. I just want to share to you that like magic creation, as long as you're intuitively on the right frequency understanding of what can be done intuitively because you've seen it done, regardless of what everybody else is telling you, it will create itself in this reality, because that is just how the law works. That's just how the world works. That's just how the universe works. So if you can see it clearly, it's already done, and you just have to keep putting in the work and showing up in the ways that you can. And then regardless of what other people say, like you don't have to worry about them, because you intuitively know what is right and what is possible. So, and if you don't know these things, obviously at first, like I recommend going out, testing it, trying different things, talking with different people, kind of like I talked about a couple of videos ago. And you can start to explore the world and have different experiences, different stories, different ways of being able to overcome certain things that people have told you to be impossible in the past by having different interactions with different people. Like I had a conversation the other day, I talked about it briefly in a couple of other videos as well too, where it's just like this dude, he ended up having multiple different cars. He's gone into the negative multiple times, but he keeps falling. And he gave a quote of Winston Churchill, where he talks about, through each adversity, through each failure, you keep going from failure to failure to failure without losing any amount of enthusiasm. I like that. It's why I keep making these videos. Some people could be like, these videos are failing, but I'm just like, I'm going to keep trying. I'm going to keep showing up, because I talked about that, I believe, in the other video prior, where it's just like, it just takes one decision, just takes one video, just takes one conversation, one interaction, one connection to completely transform your life. And if you intuitively believe that that is true, then it will become true, and you'll start to see it in no time at all. So with that being said, I'll let you guys get on with the rest of your day, and I appreciate you sticking through to the end. So we'll chat soon.